In the days long after Jerusalem had fallen, the people of Israel were scattered, taken from their homes, and held captive in Babylon. For 70 long years, they lived in exile, away from the land God had promised them. Many had forgotten the ways of their ancestors, some had even drifted away from their faith. Yet hope remained. One day, after the Persian Empire defeated Babylon, King Cyrus of Persia issued a decree: the Jews were free to return to Jerusalem. The journey would be long and hard, but this decree would set the stage for the return of two remarkable men, Ezra, the priest and scribe, and Nehemiah, the governor. Join us as we explore the inspiring story of Ezra and Nehemiah, two leaders who transformed a broken nation into a thriving, faithful community. We will delve into their individual missions, their shared efforts, and the lasting legacy they left, a powerful reminder of how faith and resilience can lead a people back to hope, purpose, and divine promise. While Nehemiah focused on physical rebuilding, Ezra's work was primarily spiritual. As a priest and scribe, he was dedicated to restoring the people's commitment to the Law of Moses, the foundational text of Jewish faith and culture. Ezra was a man of deep devotion. He spent his days studying and teaching the laws of Moses, hoping that one day his people would remember and follow God with all their hearts. When Ezra arrived in Jerusalem, he was shocked by what he found. The city was in ruins, the once proud temple was broken and neglected, and the walls lay in shambles. But more troubling was the spiritual state of the people. Many had forgotten God's laws, and some had even taken foreign wives who worshipped other gods, bringing idols and false practices into the land. Ezra's heart broke as he saw his people drifting from the faith that had once been their strength. Meanwhile, back in Persia, Nehemiah, who served as a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, heard reports of the broken walls of Jerusalem. He knew that without these walls, the city was vulnerable, open to attacks from enemies. The walls represented protection, strength, and a place where the people could gather in peace. Nehemiah wept and prayed, asking God to make a way for him to return and rebuild Jerusalem. Moved by Nehemiah's heart, the king granted his request and even sent soldiers to ensure his safe passage. When Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, he and Ezra joined forces to rebuild not only the walls but the hearts of the people. Nehemiah gathered the people together, and he inspired them to pick up stones, bricks, and mortar to rebuild the walls. Families worked side by side, the city buzzed with the sounds of construction, hope building alongside each stone. Nehemiah was a determined leader. Even when local enemies, men like Sanballat and Tobiah, threatened to attack, Nehemiah refused to back down. He encouraged the people to work with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other, ready to defend and build at the same time. Against all odds, in just 52 days, the walls of Jerusalem stood tall and strong once more. Nehemiah's mission was primarily physical and political, centered on restoring Jerusalem's wall, which was essential for the city's security and integrity. As the city lay vulnerable to external threats, a strong wall symbolized strength, protection, and unity for the returning exiles. But Nehemiah knew that strong walls would not be enough. They needed a foundation of faith. This was where Ezra's leadership would shine. One early morning, Ezra stood before the people gathered in the city square. In his hands, he held the ancient scrolls of the law, the teachings of Moses. Many of the people had never heard these words before. They leaned in, eager and silent. As Ezra opened the scrolls, his voice rose, reading aloud the words of God. The Levites stood beside him, helping to translate and explain each verse to the people who didn't understand the Old Hebrew. Hours passed as Ezra read from dawn until midday, his voice steady, his heart full. The people listened, moved, and many began to weep as they realized how far they had wandered from God's ways. Ezra paused, seeing their grief, and reminded them that this was not a day for sadness but for joy. He urged them to celebrate, to eat and drink, for God was with them, and His love had brought them home. They celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, a joyful festival they hadn't observed in such a way since the days of Joshua. The people rejoiced, but they also took Ezra's words to heart, realizing the seriousness of returning to God. The revival did not end there. Under Ezra's guidance, the people made a covenant with God, a solemn promise to follow His commandments. They agreed to keep the Sabbath, give tithes to support the temple, and follow God's teachings. Ezra also took on the difficult task of addressing marriages with foreign wives, a practice that had brought idol worship and foreign customs into Israel. It was a painful decision, but the people agreed, wanting to restore their commitment to God and to preserve their faith. As Nehemiah and Ezra stood together, they realized that their work was more than just building walls or enforcing rules. They had rekindled the faith of a people who had almost forgotten their heritage, bringing them back to the God of their ancestors. They organized a grand dedication ceremony for the wall. Choirs of singers, priests, and musicians gathered, filling the air with praise. The sound echoed off the newly built walls, a testament to God's mercy and faithfulness. Through their combined leadership, Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilt both the physical and spiritual life of Jerusalem. Nehemiah's dedication to justice and protection, and Ezra's commitment to teaching and holiness, forged a renewed community rooted in faith. They left a legacy that inspired generations to follow, a story of revival that would be retold through the ages. In the years to come, the people would remember how God had brought them back from exile, how He had given them leaders with courage and faith. They would remember the walls of Jerusalem, standing tall as a sign of God's enduring promise, and they would remember the sound of Ezra's voice, reading the words that had given them life once more. Ezra and Nehemiah's story became a symbol of restoration, reminding future generations that even in times of loss, God could rebuild and renew those who sought Him with all their hearts.